Welcome to episode 4 of The Breakdown. As you can see, we're still out in our planned high school site. No ground being broken on that yet, but there is a public consultation coming up next week. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But this week on The Breakdown, what we're taking a look at is, first of all, politicians speaking badly. It seems like there's been a whole lot of that lately, so we're going to try to take a look at why they're doing it, and more importantly, how people are reacting to it. After that, we're going to be taking a look at the glimpses that we've had into the UCP's war room. They've started to roll out a couple of their tactics. We're going to take a look at that and how much it's going to be costing Alberta and how that money is being spent. Then we're going to be breaking down transfer payments. Transfer payments are probably one of the most misunderstood political footballs that we have out there, so we're going to try to provide a little bit of clarity on that. And then finally, we're going to be taking a look at our meme of the week. All of that's coming up on The Breakdown. For the first section of The Breakdown this week, what we're doing is we're taking a look at politicians speaking badly. And obviously, we can't really get into this whole issue unless we start where it really all started in the last couple of weeks, and that's with our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. So if you haven't already seen the video, you're probably not watching this video right now, but just in case, basically what happened is Justin Trudeau was asked what his family specifically is doing to help decrease their carbon footprint and to help save the environment. Here's what happened.
And what do you and your family do to cut back on plastics?
We have recently switched to drinking water bottles out of water out of when we have water bottles out of a plastic, away from plastic towards paper, like drink box water bottles sort of things.
Now, it's pretty clear that Prime Minister Trudeau didn't know that this question was coming, and it's also pretty clear that he didn't have any kind of a prepared answer because he did a terrible job of answering the question, so much so that I don't think anyone knows what kind of water containers he and his family are using to try to decrease their carbon footprint. But to be clear, there's a lot of stuff that we can criticize the Liberals on. There's a lot of policy that we can criticize the Liberals on, whether we're talking about SNC-Lavalin, whether we're talking about TMX. There's a whole lot that the Liberal government hasn't done well. But for reasons that I can't seem to quite figure out, this was the issue that the Conservative Party decided they really needed to hit home on. So Conservative MP Michelle Rempel got up in the House of Commons and she made a quite long member statement where she tried to make fun of the Prime Minister for his misstep. She actually ended up misspeaking in that member statement of her own, as well as using a lot of fuzzy math. We're going to talk a lot about fuzzy math this episode. And then to top it all off, new candidate for the Conservatives, Sarah Fisher, decided to do some sort of water box challenge where she was trying to highlight, I'm not sure what. We'll play the video and you can see what you think.
No, it doesn't work.
So again, I'm not really sure what Sarah Fisher was trying to prove with that whole video she shot there, other than she needed to dump an open box of water on her head to learn that you can't drink water by dumping an open box of water on your head. Or maybe it was some sort of charity challenge that I'm just not aware of, not really sure. But ultimately what it led to is a moment of embarrassment for Canada, not only because Justin Trudeau stumbled on answering what should have been a relatively simple question, but secondary to that, rather than criticize the Liberal government on all of the opportunities for failed policy, elected officials and candidates for elected office decided to take the lowest possible route. And rather than address the underlying issues, they decided to just pander and make fun. Canadians aren't bullies, and this sort of behavior is straight up bullying. And the electorate, the people who are casting their votes in the federal election, deserve much better from both the Liberals as well as the federal Conservatives. Our last moment for politicians speaking badly in this week's episode comes compliments of Alberta's very own Education Minister, Adriana LaGrange. So for those of you that haven't been playing the home game, Adriana LaGrange and the UCP government are trying to make changes to the legislation surrounding education. One of the side effects of this is that the protections for GSAs and kids who want to create or attend GSAs in their schools are going to be significantly decreased. This is something that the LGBTQ community and a lot of other people have been really, really upset about. Up until very recently, though, the talking point that the UCP have been using is that Alberta will have the strongest protections for GSAs in all of Canada.
So let me be absolutely clear, as I have been for 2 years, that we oppose mandatory notification of parents about membership in peer support groups, including GSAs. We support GSAs. Our Education Act will have the strongest legal protection for GSAs of any province in Canada.
Apparently they decided to go back and read what they've proposed a second time because they've changed that phrasing now to saying that Alberta will have among the strongest protections for GSAs in Canada. And that's a very clever turn of phrase, but it's also incredibly disingenuous. I play a little bit of basketball. I'm not very good. If I was managed to find my way into the Toronto Raptors locker room, I could say that I was among the best basketball players in all of North America, but I'd still suck at basketball. So despite the fact that the UCP have decided to change the language, they're still rolling back these protections significantly. And in a press conference where Adriana LaGrange was trying to defend these changes, this is how she spoke about LGBTQ youth.
Specifically surrounding GSAs, we have looked at all of the pieces that pertain to this act. There hasn't been anything specifically changed to, that would lead anyone to not, I'm losing track of the question, I apologize. This is really my first time around, so I apologize. But really, I want to just reiterate that we are going to look after every single student. I care about every single student, regardless of the label that they have. And so I care about every single student, whether they are, whatever.
Now, obviously, there's a lot of people who have been really offended by the fact that Adriana LaGrange chose to refer to marginalized youth as whatever. But the big takeaway from all three of these is we need to demand better from our politicians. In the first example, we have the Prime Minister of Canada who can't answer a candid question without stumbling all over himself, and that's embarrassing for Canadians. But even more embarrassing is the fact that in our last two examples, we have politicians who are supposed to be representing their elected areas just behaving mean. Jason Kenney's talking a lot about how we have a crisis of constitutional unity. Well, we're not going to solve that constitutional crisis by me being mean and throwing low shots, and I firmly believe that politicians and elected officials should be working every day to raise the bar, not limbo under it. Alberta got its first look into what Jason Kenney's social media war rooms are going to look like this week when the government of Alberta launched the BC for TMX Twitter account. Now, very quickly after this Twitter account was launched, a lot of people got very suspicious of it, and they actually owned up to the fact that the BC for TMX Twitter account is part of a provincial program to try to convince British Columbians that TMX is a good idea. Now, I'm no political strategist by any stretch, but I'd be willing to bet that the best way to convince somebody that they should be trusting you in regards to bringing forward a major energy program into their province is perhaps not by starting the conversation with dishonesty and misleading Twitter accounts, but what do I know? It's just me and everybody that I know in BC. But secondary to that, one of the big things that really caught people's attention was this Twitter account actually came forward and admitted how much money the government's putting towards it. $1.1 million. Now, this is at a time where the government of Alberta is looking at enacting legislation to freeze contract talks that are otherwise legally binding under any other circumstance, and they're looking at ways to potentially decrease wages for public sector workers who work very hard to take care of Albertans. Well, all of this is going on. They're spending $1.1 million on a Twitter account. There's a lot of better ways to spend $1.1 million than on a Twitter account, and I'd argue one of the biggest ones would perhaps be to put that money towards rebates for the federal carbon tax that Alberta is now going to have to deal with because Jason Kenney killed the Alberta carbon tax. For the deep dive on this week's breakdown, we're taking a look at transfer payments. Now, transfer payments are probably one of the most commonly manipulated political footballs that politicians love to use to get people angry, to get people upset, and to try to get themselves votes. Unfortunately, they're also grossly misunderstood, so we're going to try to provide a little bit of clarity around transfer payments. In order to really understand transfer payments, we have to start with income tax, though. So, for example, for me, I go to work, I make a certain amount of money a year, and at the end of the year, I have to do my income tax returns. Based on how much money money I made that year, I either have to pay the government, I might not have to pay them anything, or maybe I get a little bit of money back. But where transfer payments start to come into the equation isn't at any point up to there yet. Where they come in is almost where I start to look at where I might be getting a child tax credit. The reason why I like to use the example of the child tax credit or any other program, whether it's GST credits or something like that, as an example of transfer payments is because that's effectively what transfer payments are. The Government of Canada collects a boatload of money every year from taxpayers. Now, some of that money does go towards our armed forces. Some of that money does go towards our healthcare system. Some of that money does go towards all of the different things that a lot of us take for granted that are provided by the federal government. But one of the other things that they do with that money is they take a look at where the provinces are that are really suffering. So for example, with the child tax credit, if I'm making 8-9 figures salary, I'm not going to get any kind of a child tax credit because the Government of Canada looks at that and goes, you're doing okay on your own, you don't need a top up from us. But if I'm barely scraping by or I'm not making any money at all, that's a situation where the Government of Canada goes, this person, for whatever reason, is really struggling to make ends meet, and they have kids in the equation. We need to make sure those kids are being taken care of, so we're going to supplement them a little bit with something like the child tax credit. The person who's making the least is going to get the most amount of money, but it doesn't bring them necessarily up to the same level as the person who's making the 6 or 7 figure salary. That's effectively what transfer payments are. So at no point does the federal government reach into Alberta's magical cash pool and start just pulling money out to send to Quebec or Prince Edward Island or Newfoundland or any places like that. All of the money for transfer payments comes from income tax, corporate tax, or investment tax. So it's money that you would pay in income tax anyways. This is a separate federal program that's designed to supplement other provinces that don't make the same amount of money that provinces like Alberta historically have. Alberta has been blessed with all kinds of natural resources, and we've used them to generate a lot of money. Unfortunately, one of the things that we haven't done is saved very much of that money. If you take a look at what the actual numbers are, Alberta as a province has over $200 billion of oil royalty revenue that we don't have anymore. We didn't save it, we spent it on things, but it's not there anymore. So if you want to take a look at the reasons why Alberta is suffering right now, it means that you have to have a really difficult conversation and a really challenging conversation about the fact that historically, Albertans haven't been great at managing our money. But the transfer payments piece, as much as it's probably the worst named program in the history of federal programs, because it makes it sound like they're taking money out of Alberta, isn't the case. Regardless of where those transfer payments have to go, and Alberta may very well be receiving some in the future, but regardless of where those go, you're still going to pay the same amount of income taxes no matter what. So it's really important to realize that when we're talking about transfer payments, it doesn't come from oil royalties. It only comes off of that income tax, corporate tax, and investment tax. So if somebody's trying to tell you that the transfer payment program is working differently than it actually does, the best thing that you can do is take a step back and ask why they're lying to you. The meme of the week on The Breakdown this week is brought to us compliments of the Minister of Immigration and Labor, Jason Copping. I hope I'm saying that right. A couple of days ago, he tweeted this out, where he says that experts and academics have confirmed the math. And if you take a look at the changes to the legislation that the UCP is proposing under Bill 2 in regards to overtime, there's not going to be any change at all. Now, first of all, there's a couple questions that I have about this little meme that they've thrown up for us here. The first one is, who are these experts and academics? We don't really get any information about who they are. And while I'm sure that they're among the best experts and academics in the world, just like I'm among the best basketball players in the world, the reality is that we don't know. So that raises some interesting questions. The second question that I have about this infographic is, well, it's broken down by industry in regards to how much the average Albertan makes depending on the industry that they're working in. The very top number tells us how much overtime the average Albertan brings home every week. And it works out to about $1,600 and change a month. I don't know about you, but I don't know that many Albertans who are bringing home $1,600 in overtime a month, and especially given that the UCP has made it sound like that across all industries, Alberta's economy is really suffering. If every Albertan's bringing home that much in overtime a month, it doesn't exactly square with what they're trying to say Alberta's economy is experiencing right now. But the really important thing to take away from this infographic is that it appears to be talking about paid overtime. So even if you want to give the full benefit of the doubt to the experts that they've brought in and the academics that they've brought in, and you want to say that all of these numbers are correct, all that they've proven is that for paid overtime, those numbers aren't going to change. Well, we already know that. The concerns that people have with overtime under the changes that the UCP want to make to labor legislation isn't in regards to paid overtime, it's in regards to banked overtime. So this meme right here, not only is it highly, highly questionable, extremely vague, and I still don't believe that I'm making $1,600 a month in overtime, but it's not even talking about what it seems to be saying that it wants to be talking about. Maybe they used up all of the budget for this meme on the Twitter account that cost $1.1 million. And that's it for this week on The Breakdown. Before we go, there's one quick little thing I want to remind you all about, especially those of you that live in the community of Calgary Northeast or even Calgary North. And it has, again, to do with the Calgary North High School, or the North Calgary High School. On June 26th, there is a public consultation being held at Nose Creek School, just behind me there, and it is absolutely critical that everybody in our community who wants to see this high school get built shows up and makes sure that they let the people who are designing the high school and they let the people who are building the high school know we want this high school built and we want it built right. Secondary to that, to date, we still don't have funding for the high school. We only have design funding. And the challenge with that is if we don't get a firm commitment from the Alberta government to make sure that that high school gets built, all we will have is just a pretty picture of a high school that our kids can look at while they're riding on the bus for an hour and a half to get to classes. So please make sure that you email your MLAs and let them know that you want to see that high school get built. That's it for this week on The Breakdown. We'll see you next time. There is a hearing, a public consultation thing. Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of blooper reel material this time around. Let me start that again. Cool fodder then. So, I was almost all the way through that one. Just about made it there.
Almost.
What am I talking about again? In our first section of the Blakedown, it's going to be a Blake Lively show. We're going to get Deadpool to come by later. It's going to be great. Or anything else. Doesn't really... Albertans got their first look into what the UCP's Jason Kenney's. It's Jason Kenney's war room. Let's not paint everyone. Okay. Let's do that again. Our meme of the week comes to us compliments of Minister of the in style. Yay, for what? The transfer payment. Make to that labor legislation. So transfer payments are the thing, and what they do is they take payments and then they transfer them. It's from Alberta only, and they take all our money and they give it away to people who don't deserve it. I know that much. And they're leftists is what they are. Leftists, socialists, communists. And they take our money.
And we deserve all of it back.
We do. Should have just started busting the groove.